So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a battle on the test build of the upcoming new patch. As you can see, this is another large-scale siege, so with the slight change around in how I'm now allowed to show certain replays, there is going to be a couple of these coming into play. There is another siege battle as well that I've been given, which will also be coming out fairly soon, albeit I think that one is on a map that we did see at some point in the past, so this one does take more priority because it's a completely new one, which was made by Red Knight, who sent me this replay as well. And a few weeks ago I was actually sent, I think, this very same map and this kind of similar battle. I don't know if it was exactly the same armies that were involved in it, but that was when versions were getting jumbled around a little bit, and also there was the issues with the leaks and all of that. So finally, though, we will be getting around to it, and it's a rather interesting one as well. We've got essentially a cityscape, but it also has this mound in the middle. There's not a lot of cover within the settlement itself, actually, but there is plenty of terrain and plenty of good firing positions for the defenders to potentially use, even once the attackers have managed to breach the outer defences. But more on that as we go through the battle itself. We will go through the attackers first and foremost, and I think it is actually a largely lore-friendly battle, or at least one that could be construed as lore-friendly. We'll start off over here with Y2K86. Playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, always an invaluable force to have on the attack, of course, because of their numbers, and mechanically this isn't really going to change too much. They're more sort of subject to the general changes in terms of various unit strengths than anything else. They are still going to largely perform and function as they always did. Moria Spearguard here on the front are a surprisingly efficient unit for what they are. They have a decent shield value. Their armour isn't the finest quality, but it is at least there, and of course their numbers being the primary thing that make them what they are. They certainly perform a little bit better than the standard Moria Goblin infantry. Just in behind the Moria Halberdiers, these guys of course act as a very cheap anchor to the front line. They have obvious shortcomings, like their armour isn't good enough to really keep them alive under any sort of ranged pressure at all, and if their formation is crumpled, then they will start to fall away very, very quickly because of extremely low stats. But if they can keep their formation pointing in the right direction, then the armour-piercing phalanx is going to be useful, of course. Just in behind, we have a very dependable bodyguard unit in the Goblin Kingsguard, 1-to-1. They do, of course, lack a little bit compared to a fair number of other sword and board bodyguards, but they are fairly numerous, and as we've seen in the past, that can be a surprisingly effective thing, especially when you're talking about multiple HP bodyguard units like this. And of course, in comparison to many of the other fighting orcs and goblins of the Misty Mountains, they do have a significant amount more quality behind them. On a map like this, I don't know how the heavy goblin crossbows are necessarily going to perform. If they can get into a good position, especially considering there's no real cover in the centre of the settlement on that mound, they could be very, very effective indeed. Of course, crossbows, big stopping power, and very, very dangerous for any defenders. Couple of units of trolls over here, starting off with some cave trolls, obviously. Pretty numerous now. Trolls in general have been made a little bit scarier in this new version of the game, and the cave trolls having this many numbers behind them is pretty intimidating, though they can also, and still their main purpose is a slightly tighter formation and their ability to crush through enemy lines quickly and cause a lot of chaos, and then follow up with a very large horde of goblins to try and take advantage of the gaps that have now appeared. A very important unit potentially for the goblin army is the cave troll drummers. They do now function as intended, so they will be able to boost the morale of nearby units and keep the goblin rabble pointing the right way for just that little bit longer. And a couple of units of White Uruk Fearmongers as well. In comparison to the Moria Halberdiers, these guys are a really genuine unit of Halberdiers, phalanx, armour piercing, all of that good stuff. And they do have a bit more quality to back them up as well, though much of the goblin infantry force here is rather basic, so they're not going to be backing up too much in the way of high quality stuff. Moving on, we have the Rhovanion, who presumably have been subjugated and are now marching upon the forces of good. Tommy going to be playing as them. Tribal levy spears at the front, which of course these tribal units are very numerous, and if you are trying to attack as the Rhovanion, having these numbers behind you can make a very big difference. So plenty of them, 203 per unit. Obviously individually not the highest quality, and the armour is a concern when you're marching into a bunch of archers, but we'll see. Tribal levy skirmishers, basic javelins, of course, when you're on the attack, this kind of unit can be extremely awkward for the defenders to have to deal with. They either waste valuable ammunition, counter-attack, which comes with its own sets of risks. Ideally, cavalry, of course, is what you would use to mow them down with, but that's easier said than done when you're charging into a force of this size. Tribal Levy slingers as well. Slingers, a new type of unit to this version of the game. A little bit less seen than javelins, but armor piercing. Very low base damage, but they can be surprisingly vicious if you allow them to be, and they've got a decent amount of ammunition as well. The Rhovanion units are, of course, the upper echelon of Rhovanion society, and their armour and survivability definitely reflects that. The Rhovanion archers will be good actually at skirmishing back and forth with the various defending armies today, but again, the defenders have the terrain to be able to deal with much of the problems that may arise as a result of that. The Rhovanion nobles in behind, a little bit more individually, well, higher quality individually than the Goblin Kingsguard that we've seen already. But sword and board units are intended to be a little bit more defensive, a little bit more dependable in nature, rather than being anything too extravagant in terms of damage dealing. But we'll see how they perform here. They should be able to absorb a lot of punishment at the very least, as should the Rhovanion phalanx. There are a few more units of pikes in the game now which have access to a shield value from the front, which mitigates one of the primary weaknesses that pikes tend to have. Though shielded pikes do tend to be a little bit more expensive, and they will then form a much more important part of your strategy. But the Rhovanion phalanx, if it can get into a good position and really hold down the defenders in place, it could prove to be absolutely vital. And in and amongst them we also have the heavy spearmen of the Rhovanion, the Rhovanion hoplons. The Rhovanion, of course, do not have access to a heavy sword variant of their infantry, so if you do want a more solid, higher tier unit of line troops to go with your pikes, then the hoplons really are your only option. So a little bit less punch in terms of attack, but they will be very good defensively. And of course we have the tribal berserkers back here, which are the main damage dealer, in fact the only really damage dealing infantry unit that the Rhovanion have. They have those big falxes, two-handed, big damage as well. But as with most units like this, they are going to fall away pretty quickly because of their lower defensive stats, so timing is going to be everything there. Meanwhile, we then have another Rhovanion army. Smeagol has a beard. Once again, more tribal levy spears, more Rhovanion hoplons in a big line, and more Rhovanion phalanx. The Rhovanion in general have got a smaller roster, kind of similar to Dorwinion in that respect, so their armies aren't going to change around too much from battle to battle. Slingers and skirmishers once again. Again, plenty of tribal levy berserkers, the archers and the nobles, so pretty much exactly the same army, maybe a few less pikes, a few less throwing units as well. Hidden, playing as another Misty Mountains army. We haven't seen the Drake Broodlings yet. We've seen them in past battles, of course, be very, very effective. The battle for Zag-Kala sticks out particularly. We'll see if they can do the same thing here. The defenders need to be on their toes, because if you allow a unit like this to run roughshod over you, you've really set yourself up for failure. The Bolgs champions as well. I mean, this more is going to be, I think, deterrent against defending cavalry sallying out. We'll see if it can be effective within the settlement itself, but especially seeing as there's some terrain in there, it's going to be quite difficult to use them. Whiter at Fearmongers and Halberdiers once more. Cave Troll Drummers looking like a fairly similar army this to the other Misty Mountains force. Crossbows and Spear Guard. More Cave Trolls, and yeah, pretty much it's going to be with the cavalry. And actually, no, there are... No, that's pretty much it. I mean, don't really know why they're disappearing at long ranges. Oh well. We shall continue for now. And finally we have Rhudaur, played by Panthan of Barsoom. Rhudaur swordsman. I mean, the regular units of Rhudaur, more tribal in nature, maybe kind of similar to the Rhovanion, only their equipment maybe is a little bit better than the tribal forces from the east. Rhudaur swordsman dependable, though not exactly spectacular. A couple of units of them. Rhudaur clansman with the armour upgrade as well, dependable unit in this kind of battle as well. Big shield value, and with the armour upgrade as well, they can absorb a decent amount of punishment. Decent enough attack for the kind of unit that they are as well, so when you're in this situation it behooves you as Rhudaur to depend on units like that. More Rhudaur swordsmen. We've got the Ettenmoor's troll hunters just in behind as well. Good armour for Rhudaur's standards, and of course the javelins going to carry some punch with them. Another shielded pike, so a bit of a conundrum for the defenders to solve this, because there are plenty of these pikemen rolling with these shields. The Rhudaur pikemen don't have the same armour values as the Rhovanion pikes, but still, the same sort of thing does apply. Rhudaur marksmen, so again they're going to be trying to do a little bit of damage at long range, but maybe not quite as effectively as their Rhovanion counterparts. We've got a unit of Rhudaur axemen skulking around in the grass, obviously big damage and big armour piercing damage at that, but they are very fragile as well, so they will fall away pretty quickly, so timing is going to be key. Another unit of Rhudaur axemen, the Witch Realm Enslavers, obviously a very strong unit of armour piercing infantry this, with those tridents of theirs. The only unit of artillery that we have so far, the Barbarian Catapult. Obviously the Barbarians themselves with those two-handed serrated spears of theirs, but the Catapult is going to be very important here. If they can get into a good position, obviously the terrain as well is going to work in favour of the attackers potentially, if the Catapult can get into a good position. And then the Coldfell Maidens, again, a good deterrent against defending cavalry sallying out. But even if they can't be used for that purpose, they are still javelins ultimately, so they can be used in the same way as javelins would be on foot. You pay a little bit more for the cavalry, of course, but it's worth it just for the peace of mind of getting another anti-cavalry tool in your arsenal. Now then, for the defenders, starting off with Arthedain over here, played by the Warlord. Seen Arthedain, of course, on the field very recently, and they performed very well there. Here, in a siege battle type situation, in a 5v3, they can really pack on the quality. Armour upgraded Arthedain pikemen make for a good solid defensive line, though Rhudaur and the Rhovanion have their own pikes, which means that it's going to be a bit of a dead heat there. So other forces are going to have to be the ones to win the battle for Arthedain. I mean, we've got the Dorwinion Rangers here. They are, well, they're hiding in there. But Arthedain Spearmen, fully upgraded as well. Again, solid defensive unit. The defenders of Fornost, two-handed swordsmen like this, I mean, outside of the really high-end, heavily armoured units from the Rhovanion, they should do pretty well against most of the units one-to-one on the field today. They do really well against lightly armoured, low defence units because of their really high base damage on heavy swordsmen. So Rhudaur and the Misty Mountains best beware. High Lords of Anuminas, the highest tier of Arthedainian infantry, obviously the replacement for the foot-based Knights of Anuminas, though that unit still exists on horseback. Very strong unit of sword and board infantry that's very defensively savvy. We've got the Catapult in here as well, the Trebuchet of Numenor we've seen, well, actually there is an upcoming field battle which is going to be artillery based, and in that the trebuchets are one of the main fixtures of the battle. Here in a more defensive situation, however, it's going to be interesting to see how it performs and where Arthedain decide to put it. Trebuchet crew, of course, armed with those hammers. Grey Company are hidden as well. Body piercing projectiles potentially. That'll be interesting to see. Arthedain marksmen. We've got the Anuminas Gate Guards, a higher end unit of pikes. And then we also have more defenders of Fordos, so investing heavily in them. And here we are, the Knights of Anuminas on horseback as well. Interesting to see how they get used. I mean, there's plenty of anti-cavalry tools the attackers have, so timing will be key. Here in the middle, we have Dorwinion, played by Winged Swordsman 44. So we have the Moriquendi Glade Masters. Again, they should be really, really good against a lot of the lighter units that the attackers are working with here. I mean, they're very, very strong in melee. Dual wielding as they are as well, that melee defense they have is going to be difficult to crack, but obviously ranged units can be pretty effective against them because of slightly lighter armour and no shields. Moriquendi pikes, elven pikes, have a real tendency to be pretty damn good at dealing damage for the class of unit that pikes are, who tend to be a bit of a slower burn, but they do have less defensive ability than the shielded pikes on the attack and the heavily armoured Arthedainian ones that they're fighting alongside. Elvelyn marksmen, more heavy archers. We saw Arthedain marksmen previously, Dorwinion Rangers, so it's not too surprising to see the defenders invest in their archers here. All of the defending factions, they've got good access to heavier archers, so they're not going to maybe be the most damaging, the Elvelyn, but as we've seen in the past, they can be very dependable and they are difficult to wear down. A couple of units of them. We've got the Elvelyn Hammerguard. In comparison to the High Lords of Anuminas, they're not as defensively savvy, but they do have access to armour-piercing attacks with those hammers, so being a more specialist unit, the Hammerguard should do quite well here. There's another unit of the Moriquendi Glade Masters. There are Stalkers hidden here as well, and more pikes, so it looks to be more of a Moriquendi focused army this, with more Moriquendi bows and plenty of Elvelyn infantry, which I guess makes sense. This is clearly an elven tower, so this must be a centre of Moriquendi influence. Elvelyn infantry and Elvelyn Vanguard representing the standard swordsman and spearman of Dorwinion. And finally, we have Red Knight himself, the creator of the map, who is playing as Dale. Good defensively, of course, Dale, with Dalian bowmen. We've got some Bardian marksmen and river patrol, so plenty of ranged punch from Dale, as you would expect, as well as being good in a skirmish battle. We've got some Dalian spearmen in there. We've got the Dalian Royal Guard, a very heavily armoured high-end archer. We also have the handheld wind lances of the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, a very deadly unit. We didn't see the Wards of the North, interestingly enough, so this will be the only armour-piercing archer on the field today. Barding Herd, Dalian spearmen, Dalian bowmen, and some Dalian paladins in there as well, with the big armour-piercing damage on those great maces. And then moving along, Barding Herd and Dalian spearmen over there, and then finally there is a couple of units over here with some Dalian spearmen and some Barding Herd. So plenty of ways into the settlement, including some right at the back if that's what the attackers want to do. I'll make a little bit of a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. So we'll rejoin here, I think, as the attackers start to make their way into the settlement, into some areas that the defenders have decided to cede to them immediately, which I think is probably for the best. Given the amount of ways in, you do want to make the settlement a little bit smaller for yourself, but you still want to leave yourself a little bit of room to retreat and reorganise yourself if that is something that you end up needing to do. If you have nowhere to retreat to, of course, it really just ends up being a bitter slog right from beginning to end. But it is going to be quite interesting to see, because the settlement is divided really into these self-contained little sections. 3 of them in total. This long thin one over on this side, we have the mound with the tower in the middle, and then more of a square over on the other side. But yeah, plenty of angles for the defenders to have to consider, and of course a 3v5 is always a fairly difficult thing to try and manage for defenders. But I do think there are good opportunities here for crossfires and shooting into the back of attacking infantry units and really getting some excellent value with your own skirmishers. And conversely, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for the attackers based on the kind of settlement that it is. These standard cityscape maps do have a tendency to have these large stone walls, which can lead to defenders wasting ammunition sometimes by burying arrows in the dirt right in front of them, but I think they should be okay on this occasion. Arthedain marksmen getting into a good position here. I mean, they could start firing at the front of the Moria Spearguard, but I'd recommend that even these more regular units of archers need to be very careful with their ammunition, because every arrow is going to count when you're dealing with this kind of numbers discrepancy. Of course, the Misty Mountains and Rhudaur in particular are numbers heavy, but so too is a good portion of the Rhovanion army, so it is a veritable horde that the defenders are going to have to try and shake off here. The cave trolls moving in. I mean, there's no javelins or high damage projectiles nearby that would cause serious damage to them quickly, so simply biding their time for now. Tommy, much like on the other side, a decent portion of the settlement is being ceded to the attackers right away. A little bit more of a front foot defence over here against Y2K. I mean, interestingly enough, it's looking like the Rhovanion and the Misty Mountains make for an interesting combination over on this side. Trebuchet, fire. Looks as though they missed, interestingly enough, or are they going after something else? Trying to shoot over the roofs. Common infantry revealing themselves. Very, very basic, of course, but again, it's all about the numbers here. As they start to scurry forwards. I mean, a single line of Arthedain spearmen. I do worry a little bit that Arthedain is not committing enough. I mean, they have reinforcements close by, and this choke point over here for Rhudaur to try and make their way through is pretty horrible, especially when you consider that all of these pikes and spears are waiting for them. Rhudaur are drawing the short straw in terms of potential ways into the settlement. Even over here, the buildings are offering pretty good cover. Are we going to see this battle kick off in earnest? Tribal Levy Spears slowly making their way forwards. I mean... Oh. That was someone complaining about being under fire. Must have been the Moriquendi bows. Rhovanion archers. You can try and push the enemy skirmishers around a little bit. Will make the defenders feel just that little bit more uncomfortable. Bardian marksman in a good position. Standard unit of goblin infantry moving in first. That surely will not be enough to tempt Dale into loosing any of their arrows just yet. Dalian Royal Guard as well. Still stacking up for the time being, the attackers. I would have thought the battle would be underway by now. Just reorganising themselves a little bit, the Arthedain Spearmen, looking like they're getting into shield wall. Get themselves into a more solid formation. Knights of Illuminus as well. I mean, even if they do break through that line quickly, the Knights of Illuminus could charge in, lances down, and do pretty horrendous damage to any goblins that do get through, so pretty good contingency plan there. It's a hell of a mini-map to behold when the reds are swarming around the blues in the middle. Still nothing in terms of an outright commitment of force just yet, though. Slowly making their way forwards. Still nothing in terms of defending salvos launched yet either, so they are... Oh no, the ones of the north are here. I was mistaken, we simply missed them. So there is another armour-piercing archer unit. Potential damage there. I think it is going to be over here, surely, where the battle has its first engagement, and indeed Goblin Infantry thought about charging into the spear line there, but thought better of it. Arthedain Spearmen would certainly fancy their chances against an opponent of that level. Again, this is good from the attackers as well. They are being patient and they are waiting until they're all ready before they start their attack. In a 5v3 that can make life very difficult for the defenders because it means there's no lopsidedness. Tribal Levy Slingers firing their projectiles into the front of these Dalian Spearmen. Of course, the temptation will be for the Dalian Spearmen to try and counter-attack, but that'll be when the Rhovanion simply send forward some of their own infantry. This has been enough, interestingly enough, for the Dalian Bowmen to fire into them in return. The Rhovanion will be quite pleased with that. They're doing decent damage to the Dalian Spearmen, who are now moving forward, so this really is where the battle truly begins. As the projectiles rain down. Yes, indeed, and syncing up nicely. Orcs the Misty Mountains on this side, testing the waters of Arthedain's front line also. The spears backing them up, the Arthedain Spearmen. As long as it's mostly these regular Goblin Infantrymen on the front line, they won't mind that whatsoever. As the spears start to push forward as well, will they try and force their way through? I don't think they have the mass to be able to do that. They could send some trolls forward, and then they certainly would, but reinforcements are close by as well. Rhudaur are starting to make their way forwards into the jaws of that Arthedain defence. Now at the back as well. I mean, the two sides of the settlement are probably going to see far more of a commitment of resources early, just because Rhudaur aren't going to be able to commit their whole force to go down this route. And while Smeagol can, it's still a pretty nasty defensive zone. Tommy moving forwards with his slingers, mixing and matching a little bit as well. Y2K's got his own goblins back here in support. Forward come the Tribal Levy Slingers. So the game of cat and mouse begins. Will they get a volley off? Yes. Not a huge amount of damage done, but all of this will add up. Can only be a good thing for the attackers, and the snow trolls are moving forward as well, hidden in the army composition phase, but pretty deadly. And this is a big force now moving forward, and indeed I think Dale would be better off retreating to this singular choke point at this point, because there's really no way they're going to be able to hold back this slew of trolls with one unit of spears and one unit of barding herd, so they're going to have to use the Dalian Spearmen as a rear guard and save the more important Barding Herd. But this is exactly the right thing to do from Red Knight. If the enemy want to move forward with this amount of upfront force, you're going to need to be able to commit your own forces in mass. And that's not a position they were in to be able to do that. So condensing the battlefield down to one choke point, they've been slightly forced to do this, Dale, but it's the only thing they can do. Bardian Marksman firing away as well. Again, the buildings offering a little bit of cover for the attackers as they move forward. I mean, these arrows are definitely going to hit something, but if it's a troll, then it's unlikely to result in a kill. Try and whittle them down a little bit. Yeah, the Barding Herd having to sort of force march their way through the tribal levy spears that were getting in the way, but so far I think the attackers have done really quite well. The defenders have reacted in all of the appropriate ways so far, but first examples really of an engagement on the front as well. Dorwinion starting to bloody their weapons against some of the tribal units from the Rhovanion attacking through the main gates. Again, spear to spear, but the Elvelen far superior. Rhovikin archers going to be backing them up. Hoplons on the way forwards as well. Barbarian catapult firing projectiles high and wide by the looks of it. Trebuchet of Numenor right on the front now, central to their defensive effort. Defenders of Fornost committed forward now. Some Rhovanion units trying to assist the Goblin push, but the addition of these heavy swordsmen keeping things solid for now, and the Arthedain marksmen shooting into the backs. Those are some good hits that are going to be landed there. And that should be enough to blunt this attack for now. And then Rhudaur, of course, they're going to struggle going through a narrow gap like this. This is more just a box ticking attack than anything else, just making sure that every possible avenue of attack is being tested, which when you have these numbers is an absolute must for the red team. Speaking of which, is the rear of the settlement also being tested? It is, but I mean, the Rhudaur swordsmen here on their own. Elvelen Vanguard will hold them back just fine for the time being. Victory seems certain for them. Dalian Royal Guard again exercising good patience. 2 units of the Dalian Royal Guard, I mean, taking hits from the Rhudaur marksmen, but this is where that high-end Dalian armour does come into effect. I don't know about this. This is... they're going to need to lay on some sort of defence here, Dale, Red Knight. They can't allow these trolls to go in. I mean, the Rhovanion have played very well over here. Tommy has done well in the backup of the trolls as well from the Misty Mountains. It's been a very potent combination, but they'll need to... retreating initially was definitely the right thing to do, but now I think they need to stand their ground and stem this momentum that the attackers now have. I mean, they've got some really good positions for their Dalian bowmen on both sides, and regular goblins and tribals are not going to have the survivability to withstand these arrows that much. Of course, the trolls will, especially with those large wooden shields, almost look like giant barrel ends, don't they? But they do have other units that can be good against trolls. I mean, Barding Herd at least have the armour piercing, but it's just going to be a case of committing enough infantry to the point where the momentum is stalled, and still committing forward far more trolls and spears. Dalian Paladins would be the ideal thing, of course, at the centre of this, and Red Knight is doing the right thing now. It might have been just a mass misclick and then all of their units moved off, but now doing their thing. Trebuchet of Numenor meanwhile on the front here still. MORIQUENDI Stalkers with the poison projectiles, of course, with all of their forces being committed to the 2 flanks. It is a little bit thinner on the ground over here for the Rhovanion, so it's more of a token effort, this, especially when you consider that there's the quality of the Glade Masters, there's elven projectiles crisscrossing back and forth, and of course the poison will mean that these tribal units are mentally ill-prepared. Indeed, they do start routing immediately, so some good news this for the defenders. MORIQUENDI Stalkers go back to hiding. It's an interesting thing that they have in their favour, and the more that the middle forces start to waver, that's when the Knights of Illuminus could engage in a bit of a breakout attack. These defenders of Fornost have done very well. There's slinger ammunition and javelins raining down, but not particularly accurately. Those Arthedain marksmen have definitely made a big difference to the survivability of this front line. The drummers doing their best to keep these units facing the right direction, which so far has been successful. High Lords of Illuminus waving off, although that's an interesting choice because Rhudaur do seem to be slowly but surely gaining ground over here. Heavy Goblin crossbows may have something to do with that. They're having to arc their shots a little bit, but any bolt that hits is going to be good at dealing with those pikes, and so more and more it's looking like they are going to have to set up a new defence over here. And so the outer sections of the settlement will have been taken, but it makes life a little bit more simple. Dalian Royal Guard starting to fire now. Good defensive position over here, preventing any sort of flanking move. Again, Rhudaur having to deal with these buildings that are constricting their efforts. It's not just the fact that it's Arthedain pikes over here, but it is the stronger of the Arthedain pikes as well, the Illuminus gate guards, which Rhudaur are now going to have to contend with. They will be pretty happy with doing that. Rhovanon infantry and spears using their superior quality and stamina to hold back this probing Rhudaur assault. It's over here, meanwhile, where there was maybe a little bit of a concern earlier on for the defenders, but Dale have definitely managed to stabilise the situation over here, and I think in large part that's down to this excellent shooting position they have. And of course Dale, being an archer-centric faction, have got the ability to do that. Many of their archers are a little bit more defensive in nature, of course, but the fact that they have access to so many of them, who can also double as half-decent infantry, means that you're often going to see Dale bring an awful lot of their archers. Tribal heavy skirmishers trying to do their thing. I mean, this is a concern, of course. The slingers and the javelins for the Rhovanion armies have been a pretty big factor in this battle already. River Patrol trying to fill the same role. MORIQUENDI bows firing their poison projectiles down. I mean, this is something we've seen on the front as well. You may think that elven archers would be better placed going after other units, but the fact they're poison projectiles means you can rout off lowlier units like this, and ultimately they are getting a good kill count as well. Again, it's pretty vicious. Warrior Halberdiers routing the regular goblins on the front line, not doing too well in the face of such things. Rhudaur marksmen, more to the north. That's a huge amount of damage done to Ettenmoor's troll hunters. Got the Rhudaur axemen moving forward as well, trying to bludgeon their way through, but the Illuminus gate guards with their spearmen backup doing just fine for the time being. Now the reorganised defence, Arthedain pikemen leading the way, which is going to prevent any sort of downhill charge from the Knights of Illuminus. There is still some resistance being put up by what remains of those heavy swordsmen, but almost completely gone now. Marksmen, the Grey Company, in a really nasty position, as well as the Dunedain Rangers, so it's going to be a painful experience moving forward, whatever way they go about it for the Misty Mountains and Rhudaur over on this side. Arthedain, the only slight concern might be that they don't have enough infantry to lay on a solid enough front line, so if they do be hyper-aggressive here, Misty Mountains and Rhudaur, they could gain some good results. I mean, this is a bad sign for the attackers. When something completely falls apart like this, Dorwinion able to completely turn back the Rhovanion attack. Admittedly, it wasn't the most important of the assaults, but what began as being pretty well coordinated from the attackers is in a little bit of danger here, as the defenders have been able to really solidify their position in the middle, and they didn't really have much of a choice than to constrict the battle to the central hill and the ways in to the middle. Again, if you're going to be hyper aggressive as the attackers, you have to kind of expect the defenders to be willing to fall back and to a position where their entire army is then at their disposal. Because if they try and fight you piecemeal, the trolls would have just one by one broken through each of the Dalian front lines, so they've definitely done the right thing here, you would suggest. It seems certain only a military genius could win this battle. I mean, the Rhovakin phalanx do have those shields, but from the back they aren't going to be all that useful. And the Bardian marksman scoring some good hits. Further down, in come the White Uruk Fearmongers. I mean, doing their thing. Dalian paladins, Alvalan infantry. Vineguard as well. I mean, Rhudaur Axeman being on the front, the armour piercing of course will be good against Arthedain, but when you have this kind of defence laid on for you, their defensive shortcomings are going to be a real problem. Meanwhile, cavalry did charge in, trying to go after some of the... Well, I mean, the Rhovakin archers moving in now, definitely doing the right thing here. Seeing the extremely dangerous pair of units that this is, the Grey Company and their foot-based counterparts, the Dunedain Rangers. Yeah, they're going to have to move. They can't afford to get picked off by the Rhovakin. Rhudaur swordsmen. There's a lot of the Rhudaur forces in there. And now the cavalry is going to be surely enough to, obviously not the most important of kills, but it will all add up in the long run. 11 goblins mown down by the Arthedainian knights. I mean, the Snaga skirmishers will prevent any sort of really venomous aggression. Again, maybe drip feeding these units in isn't really the best thing. Need to wait until they're ready to fully commit to every angle of attack to try and take the hill. Victory seems certain. Alvalan marksmen out of ammunition and certainly played their part in turning back the Rhovanion earlier, now being asked to do the same in melee. And fall back on their armour to be a half-decent melee combatant against basic units. MORIQUENDI Stalkers now moving in as well, and that is enough to rout those 23 Hoplons. I mean, the attackers need to do something to change things around over here. Didn't actually manage to hit a solitary unit there with that catapult hit, but artillery of course is always hoping for more. The trebuchets have been crumbled. That's something in the attacker's favour. Can be so devastating of course defending artillery, but counter-sniped presumably by the barbarian catapult, and we just missed it. Dalian paladins still at the centre of this defensive effort, still 62 of them as well, and presumably doing very, very well. Of course, an ideal antidote for the more heavily armoured Rhovakin units that are now on the front line. With those great maces of theirs. Defending javelins doing their thing as well. River Patrol may be basic in nature, but managing to skim across the top of this attacking front line, and more damage being done, hitting more of the phalanx units as they approach to try and reinforce this front line and keep it going. Javelins continuing to do their thing. Alvalan infantry marching across. Trudge into position. Defenders definitely backing one another up, a bit of Dorwinion support on the front line, and the Alvalan infantry, nothing spectacular of course, but very dependable in this kind of fight, and it's exactly the sort of thing which is not a huge amount of armour piercing really for the attackers on this front line. Many of the Rhovakin units are more defensive. I mean, you have the Mountain Orc Berserkers in there, but surely they're going to be one of the first ports of call of a target for something like the Bardian Marksman over here. down into that position as they surely are. Blackshot Dragon Slayer starting to fire as well. I mean, there is a little bit of forward momentum now from the attackers, starting to force the defensive line back a little bit. Trying to force the issue, but what else have we got going on? I mean, Rhudaur. In several places there is a little bit of evidence that the attackers have spread themselves maybe a little bit too thin. Not enough concentration of force in some areas. Maybe a little bit too slow to try and take advantage of some of the gains they made early doors. Luminous Gate Guards easily able to hold back this secondary Rhudaur assault, and there's not a huge amount Rhudaur have left to pressurise this area either. In the Arthedain pikemen moving in, a little bit of an attack coming forward from Rhudaur, but some charges from the Knights of Illuminus, a couple of units of the regular Arthedain pikemen partially surrounding the swordsmen, which should be enough to deal with them. And there's also more poison projectiles coming in as well. The MORIQUENDI stalkers still going about their work. I have to say, I think these poison arrows from Dorwinion have definitely proven to be a pretty big factor in this battle. Knights of Illuminus still charging down. Trailman Slavers on the front line now as well. Of course, now wielding their weapons like halberds as opposed to axes as they did in the last patch, which is all well and good, but this is probably where the attackers are at their most dangerous now. Rhudaur still have some good supporting units. There's still enough numbers over here, but stuff like the Dunedain Rangers and Grey Company being in close attendance is surely going to be of great concern for them, because things could get pretty messy pretty quickly if they are not careful. Knights of Illuminus, MORIQUENDI pikes. I mean, more reinforcements arriving. I think perhaps sensing the fact that this is where the attackers are at their most dangerous, more infantry reinforcements are necessary so that they can truly get the most out of those Dunedain Rangers from on high. And that high base damage is surely going to be really important here. Going after stuff like the Enslavers and the Rhudaur pikes, all going to be very, very good targets, allowing for pike supremacy for the defenders. High Lords of Illuminus also involved now as well, a very tough nut to crack. Warrior Spearguard may be good for their tier, but not good at beating units like that one-to-one. This is more like it though, maybe. Drake Broodlings starting to bowl through the enemy. Time and time again we've seen the Drake Broodlings, once they get going, be a real annoying unit for defenders to have to try and stop, and they have actually managed to break that position, and oh my. Full-blooded assault now coming in on both sides. So this is, I think, the key moment of the battle, this. If the defenders can stay strong, do good damage and use their projectiles, then the attackers won't really have the ability to mount another offensive like this. But of course, the opposite is also true. If the defenders cannot maintain their positions, and if they start to get overrun and overwhelmed, there isn't anything they can do. There isn't anywhere left for them to retreat to anyway, frankly, so. But Elvel and Hammerguard, plenty of pikes, Dunedain Troll Slayers getting involved as well. There is the Rhovanion nobles, all of these trolls. You can see the cave trolls do have significantly less survivability than the monstrous equivalents we've seen in other battles. Of course, stuff like the Blackshot Dragon Slayers in melee are going to be very important here. Second unit of Black Shots as well, doing their thing. Dalian Royal Guard up on the hills, Rhudaur Swordsman, Bardian Marksman. So still a few units that have actually been left behind and potentially can flank the enemy for the defenders. One to the north, going after the Drake Broodlings. I mean, the Drake Broodlings, I don't know why they're disappearing at long ranges. It's really difficult to keep track of them. If that's the case in-game as well, it's no wonder the Drake Broodlings have been flying under the radar so far. You can see here the Dalian Royal Guard, now a sword and board unit in melee, which is more defensive, but it's also less useful at killing these Drake Broodlings quickly than the way they used to be. It is a little bit more thematically appropriate for them, though, I think. But the Drake Broodlings will start to fall away now. I think seeing the level of threat they pose, 2 units of armor-piercing archers are focusing them down. The Trolls, all of these phalanx units as well. This is a big assault. You could do with some extra support. I mean, there is still the small matter of a force attacking from the main gate as well. Tribal Berserkers. The in-game volume's been turned down by something, but we'll deal with that for the next battle, I think. Tribal Berserkers taking hits, so still a good amount of pressure coming in from ranged support over here, which should be enough to at least keep this under control for now. MORIQUENDI Stalker's going to try and charge in, and they actually succeed at getting a charge on those Tribal Berserkers. Of course, Horse Archer's not going to be as devastating as the Knights of Illuminus, but the mass alone will be enough to do the business. Over here, meanwhile, Dunedain Rangers, I mean, the Grey Company have been targeted, and understandably so. One of the most dangerous single units that the game has to offer now on horseback in terms of their ranged potential. But they have been able to loose a good amount of arrows. Another unit is arriving on the front line, trying to punch right through the middle here, the Attenmore's Troll Hunters, and the defenders are a little bit thin on the ground. They can't afford for their lines to be compromised. We are into the final 10,000 frames now. The High Lords doing their thing. Victory is almost a certainty. Defenders of Fornost are a unit that can be committed as a reinforcing unit if need be, and I think that need is pretty great at this point. MORIQUENDI Stalkers, once again, it's kind of hard to tell how much damage stuff like the crossbows, slingers and javelins for the attackers have done to the defenders over the course of the battle. Obviously on a settlement like this it can be a little bit difficult. I mean, a little bit flat-footed there, but the defenders of Fornost do now intercept the Attenmore's Troll Hunters, and I'd be surprised if the Troll Hunters' morale withstands this blow. Arthedain Spearmen now free to do as they please, and reinforcements are needed elsewhere, so they should be redeployed. Alien Royal Guard in place. Over here, they have completely forced the defenders back, so there's no attacks coming from... Well, I mean, the Alien Royal Guard are now doing so, but it's a little bit of a fragmented thing. But the Dunedain Troll Slayers with their javelins, Wards of the North, all of these ranged units for the defenders have been doing a lot of damage to the attackers, and I think that is key. Many a 5v3 in the past we've seen the defenders dump their ammunition early and then have nothing left in the late game. That hasn't been the case here, and that's what's keeping them in it so far, and might be enough to keep them or gain them victory in the battle overall. There goes the Rhudaur General. Losses of the General might prove to be terminal, really, for the attackers. Dalian Royal Guard, I mean, the 2 units of Dalian Royal Guard is pretty significant, obviously. They are bodyguard quality in melee. Still a few of those paladins remaining, only 6 of them, but they have definitely been giving it their all in this battle. Another unit of them on the way forward now. Dunedain Troll Slayers taking hits, but I think they may have used up all their ammunition already, so it's not the end of the world, but still perhaps should be committed to melee. The MORIQUENDI Stalkers have arguably been, well, I think definitely if you consider all the damage they've done at range, but they've been more of a factor than certainly the Knights of Illuminus have been. Tribal Berserkers, when they're at full strength like this, it's a very dangerous thing to charge into, because as soon as they start swinging with their falxes, it's going to be very painful for the Stalkers, but trying to charge them in just to prevent the Berserkers from having free reign of the interior of the settlement is probably the only thing they can do from the front at this point. As the Rhovanion are gaining the upper hand here, they do still have a few units that they can use to reinforce as well, but these Tribal Berserkers represent one of the biggest threats on the battlefield now for the defenders. We do still have those Knights of Illuminus who should probably be over there helping the Stalkers. So far they have been kept over here as maybe a bit of a panic button. There's still more reinforcements to deal with, of course, over here, but The defenders doing their damnedest to keep things as they are. Do the Dorwinion Rangers still have ammo? It looks like it. Now might be the time to use it as well. Try and deal with more of those Rhovanion phalanx, because as much as these High Lords of Venuminous have been mulching their way through standard Moria units, if they get caught on the ends of pikes, it's going to prove to be a bit of a sticky situation for them, you'd assume. It seems certain only a military genius could win this battle. Snaga throwing their javelins in. Yeah, and the Berserkers now, I think, maybe seeing it a little bit late with his Knights of Venuminous, but they will be called into action now to try and deal with the Berserkers. Still a couple of MORIQUENDI pikes left, but there's some Dorwinion Troll Slayers arriving on the front line. I think that was, yes, it was one of the Rhovanion generals there. You could see from the wings he was wearing. That's a fortuitous kill there, because what remains of the Rhovanion, I mean, I think they are trying to completely finish off the attackers over here at this point. Bolg's champions over here, I was wondering what became of them. They are over here, they are taking arrow fire though, pretty heavily. Still the Coalfell Maidens as well, making their way through. Wards of the North still firing away, and yeah, they need to use their ammunition at this point, because more and more, if it comes down to a very close finish, the Wards of the North will need to be in melee, and they may rue not having used their ammunition on anything. At some point there does become a point where you need to be less fussy about your targets and just try and get as much value as quickly as possible as you can. Bolg's champions are going to make their way up here. If they can't get a good charge onto the Wards of the North, the same applies to them as applied to the tribal berserkers, those two-handed weapons of theirs, and also kind of last samuraiing them. It wasn't the most venomous of volleys there, and ultimately the Bolg's champions do get a pretty decent charge there. Actually sword and shield now. Well, they have a secondary weapon like that in melee. Interesting. Dorwinion Troll Slayers doing their thing. Rhudaur swordsmen and Mountain Orc berserkers being forced back by the Dalian Royal Guard. Frame rate stuttering in the areas where the corpses have piled high. I don't think the defenders have got enough manpower left, honestly. I mean, the MORIQUENDI Stalkers are managing to get in and around the enemy now. There's another Misty Mountains general. I mean, morale is, of course, ever the important factor. They bowl through the heavy goblin crossbows there, although Dorwinion Rangers starting to fire now. Tribal berserkers, the target of their attentions. Arthedain spearmen finally making their way over here as well. The Warlord has been maybe caught a little bit more flat-footed in this battle than his allies have been. Dorwinion Rangers pulling out their axes in melee with the support of the other unit of Rangers up on the hill, firing into the backs of these tribal berserkers. That should be enough to defuse this situation, but there's plenty more where that came from, unfortunately for them. Arthedain spearmen are shaken and exhausted, but they need every last soldier to hold their nerve at this point, the defenders, if they are to be victorious. Berserkers, of course, will continue to fight no matter the odds, as will the High Lords of Venuminous, to be fair. Dorwinion Troll Slayers with their spears in melee, dealing with these tribal levy skirmishers. Rhodanion archers in the tops of the hills. The Grey Company still roaming around, but the very top of the hill has actually been occupied by Smeagol Has-a-Beard's Rhovanion force. I think they're not going to have enough manpower here, the defenders. I think ultimately the attacker's going to have too much left in the tank, and coordination being the key here. I did mention how it is extremely difficult for the defenders to be able to win a battle in a 5v3 if the attackers are coordinated, and that has proven to be the case here. Troll Slayers doing their damnedest, Dalian Royal Guard in close proximity, but I think particularly in the late game here they had a lot of those tribal berserkers left, and that is a tough unit to have to fight in bulk in the late game when your army is already exhausted and depleted. the damage they're capable of kicking out quickly against a force which is already flagging is tough to take. Wards of the North also backed into a corner by pikes and the strongest single unit of infantry that the Rhovanion have to offer. So that's another thing which the attackers have managed to contain and ultimately destroy here late on. Knights of Unus, only 3 remain. Those rangers that were up on the high ground now being committed to melee. Axes drawn. Still a few of the High Lords of Illuminus remaining. 19 of them. I mean, considering the odds they've been fighting, I think their defensive abilities can certainly not be in doubt, but that was always true when they were in their old form as well. Extremely strong defensively. The attacking artillery as well. And this is probably going to be the end, unfortunately for the defenders. Another unit cresting the hill, but it's more attackers and it's more tribal berserkers to have to try and deal with. Rhudaur archers have moved forwards. Still a smattering of high quality units for the defenders. Still the Daily Royal Guard trying to fight to the Wardens of the North to give them a hand. But defeat seems certain for them as the pikes have turned around. I feel like, weirdly enough, the in-game volume has gotten quieter as the battle has gone on. And that's a weird thing. I mean, it's not the end of the world, of course. I don't really care about not being able to hear the announcer as such. But the sounds of battle may be a little bit more important. It's something I suppose I'll look into for the next battle. Oops. 4 Daily and Royal Guard remain there. 13 Dorwinion Troll Slayers, spears drawn, trying to deal with what remains of those Moria halberds. It's just going to be a valiant fight to the end, I think, for the defenders now. 4% the differential. That will probably grow to 5% come the end of the battle. That sounds about right, considering the numbers that we're seeing left. Not a bad performance at all. Tribal Berserkers. There's still the MORIQUENDI Stalkers, who, as far as a single unit goes, have been arguably the most impressive unit on the field. Very good use of their ranged attacks, and as good as you can expect from a unit of horse archers when being used as a bludgeon in the late game. Not really anything else they could have done. A key loss in hindsight was the trebuchet, I suppose. Not able to lay down its full effectiveness in the end, considering how expensive such units can be. Especially in a 5v3, you need as close to perfection as it's possible to be in order to pull out a victory. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Now for the Stalkers as well, obviously the Barbarian Catapult crew wielding spears in melee is going to help them deal with their quarry. Fearmongers, and there's still some of the High Lords of Illuminus left, only 8 of them now. Surely the arrival of these White Uruks will finally be enough to finish them, but good performance from them. Defenders didn't really do an awful lot wrong here. Like I said, it's only minor things, but in a 5v3 even those things can add up to make your task an impossible one. Still the Dorwinion Troll Slayers. Ultimately, I don't think they are going to be able to finish off these Moria halberds. Plenty of dead goblins strewn across the battlefield, mind you. Charge from the Bolg's champions. That, I think, was one of the Dalian generals at the top of the hill. Yes, indeed. The Arthedainian general is one of the very last left. Being left alive for the time being, along with his bannerman, where the Dorwinion general is. Surprised not to see him as part of the Hammer Guard or the Glade Masters, considering all of those I think are pretty much confirmed to be dead. He's not a part of these Stalkers either. Most curious. Oh, he's going to escape. He's trying to... No. Definitely not. Not going to be allowed to flee the scene. Indeed, there goes the Arthedainian general. So that's pretty much it for Arthedain and Dale. It's just going to be Dorwinion left with their Stalkers and how much punishment they want to mete out. Tribal Berserkers charging uphill into Tribal Berserkers and Pikes is a last act of defiance if ever I've seen one. But fair enough. After all, even if you've got cavalry in the late game, there can be no victory really from this point onwards. Especially considering the... oh no, there are still some Dunedain Rangers left. But yeah. Especially considering there's the heavy presence of pikes still on the field from the Rhovanion. You know there can be no victory. Dunedain Rangers broken and fighting to the death. The late game presence of the Bolgs champions actually was pretty important, as it turns out. Really helped drive the nails into the coffin, if you will. Now the MORIQUENDI Stalkers charging downhill, the Barbarian Catapult crew with those spears still leading the way. With each charge, another one or two riders falls. Probably, I mean, we are right down to the end of the battle now, so I imagine it's only going to be one last charge before the end comes. Being left in melee as well, which is probably for the best. I mean, at this point, no sense in prolonging the inevitable. They managed to keep it to 4%, so the cavalry managing to inflict enough damage to be able to keep that as the case. And there we have it. Plenty of kills for the defenders, as you would expect. I mean, it's good actually. It feels like it's been a little while since I was able to do a larger battle like this on the test build. But yeah, you can see even with the amount of kills they were able to score here, the defenders, it still wasn't enough in the end. But a huge force for the attackers. Interesting that Rhudaur was the one with the most, although the Misty Mountains did have the odd unit of cavalry and drakes and smaller units like that, whereas Rhudaur really didn't. They had one unit of bodyguard infantry and the rest was, you know, more substantial units, and the Rhovanion of course. But yeah, plenty of kills. I mean, you could say that Dale got over 1,000 less than their allies, which maybe is a problem, but I mean, 4,000 kills is still an awful lot. And again, in terms of things that were wrong that the defenders did, it's not an awful lot. I mean, they could have foreseen the trolls coming a little bit sooner right in the early game, and then maybe they would have had an extra unit of Dalian spears and Barding Herd to help hold the line, but that in itself wouldn't have been enough to turn the battle around completely. I mean, again, I thought that, you know, arguably Arthedain were maybe a little bit slow in some instances, but to say he was too slow to bring just shy of 50 spears across and wasn't maybe quite as aggressive with his Knights of Inumnus, normally that isn't the difference between victory and defeat, but it maybe is another factor. And yeah, also use of projectiles. Again, it's one of those things that maybe overall the damage done by stuff like the goblin crossbows and the javelins and the slingers in particular, I thought it may not have been much in terms of individual amounts, it may not have been crushing, but it's still the sort of losses which the defenders can't really afford to take in this kind of situation. But it is what it is, I suppose. Let's see what did the damage for the Dalians then. I mean, you can see plenty of really good performances in spite of the loss. Dalian Royal Guard I thought were a good unit here. They were dependable in melee as well as at range. Blackshot Dragon Slayers also did well. I'm surprised actually the Dalian Paladins got so few kills. Like, they're the only ones by the looks of things with so few, and yet they were a presence on the front line for so long. I guess they were caught at arm's length by pole arms, and maybe they were up against stuff like trolls more often, but still 68 kills is maybe a little bit disappointing considering how much action they saw and how damaging they should be. Unsurprising that the archers got plenty of kills. I mean, again, it's not an outrageous amount. I mean, 423 is a lot, so it's 314, but at least 200 is what you would want from your archers in this situation, and Dale's archers are a little bit more defensive, harder to counter-skirmish with them, of course, especially when you consider the bodyguard units. But yeah, 100 kills, only 2 on those Dalian spearmen, that's obviously a bit of a problem, and only 40 on a unit of Barding Herd. I mean, if all of the units had broken 100 kills, would that have been enough to make a difference? Maybe, but again, that's such a high bar to clear, isn't it? And I can only assume that obviously Arthedain and Dorwinion, I think in particular the MORIQUENDI units, which, considering this is a battle on home turf for them, I suppose, with the tower at the centre of the settlement, I suppose it's fitting that the MORIQUENDI were the most effective units on the field. Didn't see too much of the Glade Masters, but they fought the initial assault going through the main gate early. But it was mainly, of course, the archers, in particular the stalkers. It's kind of rare, I suppose, that units of horse archers end up being the most effective unit for defenders, so that's something unique about this battle as well. But yes, big thank you to Red Knight for making this map and allowing me to show it. Big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay, and of course big thank you to the developers as well for opening up a few more options for showing off some of these replays. Like I said, there is another siege battle I have in the chamber as well, sent by Dabo, I think it is, but it is on a map I think we saw before, although I think that may have been on the old patch of the game and it's seen a little bit of refinement, but it is another cityscape style siege, so that's something else that we will see in the next couple of weeks or so, a couple more pitch battles as well, and also maybe a little bit of exploration into another Lord of the Rings Total War mod, which I'm about to go away on a work trip, but on the tail end of that maybe a little bit of a look into that, but we shall see. Anyway, big thanks to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.